Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the AFTM YouTube channel. My name's Gary Mortensen, and we've got an interview coming up with one of Austin's finest traditional musicians. The AFTM, and that stands for Austin Friends of Traditional Music, has been around since about 1974, promoting traditional music of all kinds here in the Austin, Texas area. We've got a website, aftm.us. And if you check that out, you can find links to all the other interviews that we've done this year. There's about 10 of them by now. And you can find a link to the latest issue of our Real Times newsletter, which is a pictorial issue, just pictures of AFTM activities over the last couple of years. There haven't been many AFTM activities in 2020, as you can imagine, due to the pandemic. So we're kind of going back and looking at the greatest hits from the last few years. We normally have a wonderful festival every October and hoping that we can do that again this year. Time will tell as far as that goes. Now, if you Google AFTM, you'll find out that there is a band who calls itself AFTM. They're from Georgia, a rock and roll band, but it has nothing to do with us. And I feel confident those boys don't even know how to play Flop-Eared Mule or even know what key it's in. But the gentleman we're going to talk to could tell you what key Flop-Eared Mule is in, as well as about 500 other fiddle tunes, I bet. So let's get to talking here with Mr. Doc Hamilton. Doc, how is it going today?
I'm just fine, Gary, and I'm honored to be part of this.
We're so pleased to talk to you because your name has come up a couple times recently when we've spoken to other people. I remember Jerry Hagan, the fine banjo player, talked about how he met you at the U and you introduced him to just a whole world of Austin traditional musicians. So he considers you his the gateway drug, I guess you would call it, or something such as that. Are you a longtime Texas resident, Doc?
I was born in Austin in 1941, so you do the math, as Bill Monroe used to say.
Yeah, you're into your 30s by now. I'm
and
sure.
In my late 30s, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I came back and attended UT back in the late 60s, early 70s, and then I came back and worked at UT for about 22, 23 years, and then retired. So I bleed burnt orange for sure.
I understand. Were you born into a musical family, would you say?
Not really. My dad was a singer. He was a preacher, and that led to him being a singer too, but didn't play an instrument. And my mom.
How'd you get your hands on the first stringed instrument, you recall?
I guess I was maybe 10 or 11 years old, and a friend of mine that lived in Victoria named Jerry Stevens had a big brother that had a guitar, and when his brother would go to work, we'd get in there in his room and mess around with that guitar. And just, run our fingers through the strings, and I thought it sounded pretty good. And one thing led to another, and I took some paper route money that I had and bought an old Silvertone FO guitar. And my coach at the time at the junior high tuned it for me, and then I just mashed down on the strings until it sounded good. And
I get the picture.
So I was playing chords, didn't know the names of the chords, but I could play some of the chords that E and F and G and A and whatever.
Yeah. How long was it before you were playing music with others?
I guess not a couple of years, something like that. There was a couple of guys down in Bloomington, which is a little town below Victoria, where I was in junior high. And then in Kingsville, my dad moved to Kingsville. We moved down there, and I ran across another guy that played, it wasn't a pedal steel guitar because that was before pedal steels, but he played a laptop steel. And so he and I played some together on the radio.
Yeah.
And then I got into fingerstyle guitar. I got to listening to Scotty Moore, who was Elvis's guitar player. And I liked the way he played on those old Sun records. So I figured out the fingerstyle, using the rhythm from the thumb and like Chet Atkins. And I figured some of that stuff out, and I ended up playing that through high school.
I get the picture. Well, I've seen you play in a lot of other instruments as well. I've certainly seen you play in banjo and fiddle. How did they come into your life?
Well, the banjo came in when I was in the Air Force in a station in North Texas at Wichita Falls. And I ran onto a fellow named Buck White, who had a plumbing business with his dad. And Buck was a pretty good mandolin player. And he invited me out to a little jam that they were going to have at a friend of his house. And he picked me up, and I had my Gretsch electric guitar and my amplifier. And so we went out there, and I brought him in the house and set them down on the floor, and they gave me kind of a weird look. And it turned out one of them was a guitar player and one of them was a fiddle player, and they were playing bluegrass.
Wow. And we're talking about the Buck White, right?
The Buck White, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I just said, I left my guitar in the case because I just fell in love with that sound they had with the fiddle and the guitar and the mandolin. And we got to hanging around some together, and they said, well, you can use your fingers. We need a banjo player. And so I went down and swapped that Gretsch guitar in for a banjo. It was a Gibson RB100, and tried to teach myself Scruggs style banjo without having a teacher, and I couldn't figure it out. And about that time, I moved to Shreveport, got stationed at Barksdale Air Force Base, and I ran into a guy there named Virgil Bryant, who was a automatic transmission specialist, and he hung around with J.D. Crowe, who was playing banjo for Jimmy Martin on the Hayride. So wow. Virgil was a pretty good banjo player himself, so he showed me how to work my thumb down in to get those rolls that Earl Scruggs does. It makes it different than Ralph Stanley's, the lead finger roll that Ralph Stanley does. And so then it all started making sense to me, it started coming to me. And so I played the banjo for about 7 or 8 years, here and there. And then I decided to go back to college. So I sold my banjo to get tuition money. And all I had left was the fiddle that my aunt had given me, and I couldn't sell it because every time she came to visit, she'd want to see that fiddle. So that was what I had left, and that's how I ended up with the fiddle when I was about 30 years old.
And were you pretty much self-taught on that as well?
Yeah, pretty much. I hung around with some guys up in North Texas who were pretty good contest fiddlers. And I watched everything they did and learned from them, but I was never into kind of competition with those guys. I mean, you're talking Benny Thomason and the Solomon Brothers and Major Franklin. You know, those were the hired guns up there then. But they were nice enough to let me hang around with them and play music with them. And in fact, one of the audio clips I sent you is me playing banjo, and Benny Thomason's playing fiddle, and we're sitting in his living room jamming and fiddling banjo, and Benny would play with anybody. It didn't matter to him. So he was always good enough to let me play with him.
Wow. Well, at a young age, you've already gotten to hang around with some of the great musicians of, the respective idioms there. So how many years did you put into the Air Force?
I was in 4 years, regular pure duty. Yeah, I got out in 64. Mm-hmm. And I ended up back in Texas for a short time, and I was headed for Nashville. I was going to make my living in the music business one way or another. And we took off, me and my first wife, and had 2 kids, and she was pregnant with the third. And we got as far as Shreveport, Louisiana, and she started having labor pains. So we stopped with some friends of mine and stayed the night. And I took her to the doctor the next day, and he said, "You're not going anywhere." And so we settled in Shreveport, and I got a job with a phone company. And we stayed in Shreveport for about 1.5 years, and then I got a job with NASA down outside of Houston at the Mission Control Center, and we moved to Houston.
So Shreveport chose you, sort of, I guess.
The second time around, yeah.
Yeah. Did you
Yeah,
ever get to meet J.D. Crowe during
not
that first?
not the first time. No, I didn't meet him until it was it was in the mid '70s when I was in Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
And Tony Rice was in his band, and I know Tony for years. Tony and his brother Larry would come to my house when I lived in Deer Park outside of Houston. And Tony was still, well, both of them were still teenagers, but Tony was still living at home with his parents. He was about 13, 14, I guess. And they'd come over to my house and spend the weekends, and we'd jam all weekend. So I got to work Tony then. So when I moved to Louisville in the '70s, Tony was playing with JD along with Ricky Skaggs. And they'd come over to Louisville. And about the second night I was in Louisville, the guy I was staying with, Harry Bickle, said, "Come on over to Mason Jar with me. J.D. Crowe's playing down there." So I went on down there, and Tony was there, and we hugged, and everything. I hadn't seen you in years and everything. "Let me introduce you to JD. This is JD Crowe. This is Ricky Skaggs and Bobby Sloan." And JD says, "What are you playing?" I said, "Well, I've been trying to play fiddle for a couple of years." He said, "You got your fiddle with you?" And I said, "Yeah, it's out in the trunk of my car." He said, "Well, come on in here and get out and play a tune or two with us." So I did, and played a couple of tunes with him, and got ready to take a break. And he said, "You coming back for the next set, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, if you want me to." So I finished out the night with him.
What a great memory. I just read, as I bet a lot of people have, the Tony Rice biography called Still Inside. And Doc Hamilton gets a nice mention in that book. Tony remembers it just as well as you do. And I was kind of proud to see somebody I know getting mentioned in the Tony Rice life story.
Yeah, that came about when the girl that wrote the book called me. I think she was living in Hawaii. She called me kind of like you're talking to me now. And we talked about the early days of Tony. And then she talked to him about me. And he said, "Oh, yeah, I remember him. He could play fiddle tunes on the banjo." And that's what he remembered. And then he and his family moved off somewhere else. I don't know, Florida or someplace. But Larry, his older brother, stayed around the Houston area working for the refineries there. So Larry and I played some together until I moved off.
I see. Well, playing that set with J.D. Crowe must have been a special moment. What a great band that
Well,
was.
I'll tell you, it's one of those epiphanies that happens once in a lifetime to an amateur musician who, when you're thrown in with some of the heavy hitters, and the first thing you notice is that the rhythm is so dead on that you don't have to worry about the backup, the rhythm going, and then the notes just started coming out of your instrument because you're not thinking about the rhythm part of it. It's already there. The foundation is already there. And that's what struck me that night when I got to thinking about it later, how dead solid that rhythm section was.
And that was before J.D. started his set at the Holiday Inn there, or when he was playing for?
It was before that, because when he said he did the Holiday Inn, he was playing 6 nights a week there. So they didn't play anywhere else. But before that, they'd come over to Louisville and they'd play gigs, and then now and then they'd play a weeknight or a weekend gig or whatever didn't conflict with their Holiday Inn gig in Lexington.
Yeah. Well, where was the next stop for Doc Hamilton?
The what?
The next stop, the next state of your residence.
Where did we leave off?
Well, yeah, we're in the mid '70s in Kentucky right now, I guess.
Yeah, but, okay. I was living in Louisville and working for University of Louisville Medical School. And I spent most weekends down at Kenny Baker's house, north of Nashville. And we'd work on his fence or butcher a hog or whatever. And then we'd go to the Opry Saturday night, and I'd stay the night. He had a little room up in the attic I'd sleep in. And then he'd get up Sunday morning and fix me breakfast, and we'd sit around and visit or jam or whatever. And then I'd go on back to Louisville and go back to work all the next week. And then when Bean Blossom time came around, I'd go up there and hang out with them. So I spent a lot of time around Nashville then, but also in Louisville, there was another great fiddle player named Art Stamper, who owned a hair barber shop in Louisville, and he'd come by Harry Bickle's house a lot, and a lot of musicians cycled in and out of what we call the Bluegrass Hotel, was Harry Bickle's house in Louisville. And Sam Bush was there, Vince Gill was there, Tony was around, just some great musicians in those days.
Yeah.
And so like... I stayed there till about 77. And Buck White called me one time and said, "You want to go on the road? We got Bob Black on the banjo and we don't have a fiddle player." And I said, "Well, sure, you know," so I could take off pretty well when I wanted to. So I would either join them at Buck's house in Nashville and we'd go south in the van, or he'd come north and pick me up in Louisville and we'd go north. So I played some festivals with him, with Buck and his girls, and Bob Black on banjo.
Oh, that sounds pretty great. I know Bob Black pretty well from my time in Iowa, and he's a wonderful banjo player. And of course, he toured with Kenny Baker, playing those tunes back and forth. And
and he worked with Bill Monroe when Kenny was with that band too.
Yeah. So now we're into the 1980s, are we?
Yeah, the early 80s, I moved to Tucson to take a job with the University of Arizona Medical School. And I was there about 7 or 8 months and I just hated it. I didn't like Tucson at all. I came from Louisville where you couldn't walk 6 feet down the street without running into a tree. And you go to Tucson, Arizona, and there are no trees that I could see. You know, it's all desert and heat and all that. So I didn't particularly like my job either. So I pulled up stakes and moved back to Austin. And I didn't have a job or anything. And a guy named Mickey Clark up in Louisville heard about me and called me and said, "Do you want to play in the country band with me?" And so I said, "Sure." So I packed up. By that time I was divorced. I didn't have any kids to support or a wife or anything. So I just packed up and moved back up to Louisville and toured with Mickey's band, country band, for about a year, I guess.
And you were playing fiddle with that band?
Fiddle and electric mandolin, yeah.
Uh-huh.
And that we toured pretty much northeast, up the coast, Philadelphia, New York, whatever, and then did a few gigs in Texas and out West Texas and all that. But I got tired of the road and I kept having sinus infections because of the smoke and the bars and things we play. And so I decided it was time to quit that. So I got out of that and I moved back to Texas and went to work for General Telephone, installing telephones out of College Station.
Mm-hmm. And was there much of a music scene that you came back to in Texas at that time?
Not too much around College Station or Bryan, but there was some of my old friends in Nashville, in Austin were still around. So I'd get over to see them now and then I transferred my phone company job out to management job in San Angelo at the General Telephone headquarters in San Angelo. And I did that for about a year, and then I moved back to Austin and started taking some courses at Austin Community College, electronics courses, because I was always interested I'm a ham radio operator, and I was always interested in all that. So I just taken some junior college courses. I already had a master's degree from UT, but I wanted to learn electronics and television engineering. So I went back, took some courses. Got my television engineering license and went to work for KLRU as a broadcast engineer. I did that for a while. And then that morphed into the job with the University of Texas radio, TV, film department.
Uh-huh.
And by that time, I'd run across Tim Wilson and Bob Poole and Jeff Large. I'd known those guys, and Robert Griffith, and I'd known them from the earlier days. And we started hanging out and playing music and had a little garage band called the Dim Lights. And to me, other than that one set I played with J.D. Crowe in Louisville, playing with the Dim Lights is the best music that I've ever made in my life.
Mm.
And those sessions in Tim Wilson's kitchen, when he lived before he got married and moved off to South Austin, he lived in North Austin, and we'd get together on weekends and jam and eat chili and jam some more.
Wow. All great musicians in that band. Do any recordings exist of that particular group?
If there are, I don't have any. I don't know if anybody recorded that or not. I didn't have any recording equipment then myself, so I didn't record any, but I wish there was something, because Tim Wilson will agree with you. That was some music that settled in like an old dog turning around and around on his bed and finally settling in. That's what happened.
And that was pretty straight ahead bluegrass?
It was straight ahead traditional bluegrass, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right out of Monroe and Stanley and Flatt and Scruggs.
Mm-hmm. I wish I had been here to hear that, because I know all those musicians are just wonderful players and wonderful people.
Well, you would have been welcome in that band, because we did not have a dobro player.
I see.
You would have fit.
Well, that would have been my chance.
You would have fit right in.
Well, where are we now chronologically? Are we up to 2000 by now?
Yeah, 2001, 2002, and I was living down in, well, let's see, let me think. 1980, 2001. Yeah, I worked for UT until 1998, I guess, and I retired, and I moved to Bowling Green, Kentucky to work for the federal government on a grant, Head Start grant, as an instructional technology guy. I did installed internet services and around in Head Start centers around the Southeast. And I got back in touch with Harry Bickle, my friend up in Louisville, and I got in touch with some of my friends in Nashville. So, and 1999, Virginia and I married. I think it's 1999. Is that 22 years ago?
I think so.
21 and a half, yeah. And so I moved her up to Bowling Green, and we bought a house. And then Mr. Bush, who was president at the time, got rid of my job on the cutback. So the Head Start thing folded, but I turned 62 and I just went ahead and took my retirement. And the reason I took it at 62 is I had a spell with my neck. I had neck cancer and I had surgery to cut that out, and I couldn't hold the fiddle anymore under my chin. And I didn't know if that was going to come back and exactly how many more years I had left. So I went ahead and took my retirement. And at the same time, Virginia got a job back in Austin. Yeah. And we both had elderly parents. Her parents lived in Marble Falls, and my parents lived in Franklin over east of Austin. And so we moved back to Austin. Up in Balcones Woods, and we lived there for about 12 years, and then we moved to Bowling Green. Brenham. We moved to Brenham about 5 years ago. So we've been here ever since.
The ice cream capital of Texas.
Absolutely, yeah. You can get about a pint of Bluebell for $1 over at the Bluebell factory, and I visit them now and then, yeah.
I totally understand. Well, Doc, it has been a great pleasure talking to you, hearing about just one of the more interesting lives in music that I can imagine. Hope I'm going to be seeing you in person this year somewhat.
I hope so too. If we've got our first vaccination behind us, we're due for the second one in about 2 weeks. And when things start opening up, I'll get back to playing again with Lulu Barber and Kathy Stearman around Brenham here. We play at some local nursing homes, and I'm playing bass with them. I'm playing Lulu's got a stand-up bass, electric bass. So I'll play it. Lulu plays banjo and Kathy plays guitar, and both of those are great singers. Both of those girls do the singing, and I just have to play the bass. So that's what I'm doing these days. And I've got a little touch of Parkinson's in my right hand, so I don't play the banjo or I don't play the guitar anymore. It doesn't seem to bother me playing the bass.
Uh-huh. Well, I guess I'll have to move into an old folks home to get to hear you three play.
Oh, we play out every now and then, not very often, but every now and then somebody will have us at a private party or a jam session or something. But mostly it's nursing homes.
And Lulu's kind of the brains behind that monthly jam in Fayetteville, I think.
Yes, yeah, she is.
Mm-hmm.
And I make it down there every now and then just to visit and see who shows up.
Well, Doc, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Sure glad you found the time to visit with us a bit. And for all you viewers out there, thank you so much for watching this AFTM.
And CTBA.
And there is the CTBA on top of it all. That is the Central Texas Bluegrass Association, a fine organization.
Absolutely.
So thanks again to all for watching. Stay tuned to this YouTube station because we've got some wonderful interviews scheduled to come up in the near future. And I think we're going to go out listening to a recording of Doc Hamilton playing with the father of bluegrass. So thanks again for watching.
Doc, we're glad to have you. Like to play one more for us? Katie Hill is a good one. Let's go. Dr. Glenn.